The desert wind carried whispers of doubt that morning, but it would carry something else entirely by sunset. The echo of the longest confirmed kill shot in military history, fired by the woman they said would never make it past basic training. While her fellow soldiers questioned whether she belonged on the battlefield, Sergeant Elena Rodriguez was about to prove that sometimes the most underestimated warrior becomes the one who saves them all. In a world where split-second decisions mean the difference between life and death, where doubt can be as deadly as any enemy bullet, one woman's steady hand and unwavering determination would turn the tide of battle and redefine what it means to be a protector. This is not just a story about an impossible shot. It's about the courage to pull the trigger when everyone else has given up hope. Elena Rodriguez stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall in her combat boots, her dark hair pulled back in regulation style, her brown eyes steady and determined despite the skeptical glances from her drill instructor. The morning sun beat down on the training grounds at Fort Benning, Georgia, where the Army's most elite sniper program was about to begin another grueling 8-week cycle. Of the 43 recruits who had reported for duty, she was one of only 3 women, and the only one who looked like she belonged in a high school classroom rather than on a battlefield. Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson had seen hundreds of recruits come through his program over the past 12 years, and he prided himself on being able to spot the ones who would wash out within the first week. As he walked down the line of nervous faces, his eyes lingered on Elena longer than the others. She was too small, too young, too soft around the edges. Her file showed impressive marksmanship scores for basic training, but the sniper program was about more than just shooting targets on a controlled range. It was about mental toughness, physical endurance, and the ability to make life-or-death decisions under extreme pressure. The daughter of immigrant parents who had scraped together every penny to send her to college, Elena had surprised everyone when she chose military service over the pre-med program her parents had dreamed of for her. Her father, Miguel, had worked double shifts at a factory for 20 years, his hands permanently stained with machine oil, his back bent from lifting heavy parts. Her mother, Carmen, cleaned office buildings at night after working her day job at a local grocery store. They had sacrificed everything to give their daughter opportunities they never had, and they struggled to understand why she would choose such a dangerous path. But Elena had always been drawn to service, to the idea of protecting others who couldn't protect themselves. As a child, she had been the one who stood up to bullies in the schoolyard, despite being smaller than most of her classmates. She had been the one who stayed late to help struggling students with their homework, who organized food drives for families in need, who volunteered at the local veterans hospital every weekend. The military felt like a natural extension of those impulses, a way to make a real difference in the world on a larger scale. The first week of sniper training nearly broke her. The physical demands were unlike anything she had experienced, even after completing basic training and advanced individual training. The recruits were required to carry 60-pound packs for miles through swampland, crawl through mud and brambles for hours without making a sound, and maintain perfect stillness in uncomfortable positions for entire afternoons. Elena's small frame worked against her during the pack marches, where her shorter legs meant she had to work twice as hard to keep up with the longer strides of her male counterparts. But it was the psychological pressure that proved most challenging. Sergeant Thompson seemed determined to break her down, pushing harder on her than any other recruit. He questioned every decision she made, criticized her technique even when it was flawless, and made it clear that he didn't believe she belonged in the program. During one particularly brutal training exercise, he forced her to repeat a stalk and shoot scenario 7 times while the other recruits watched, pointing out imaginary flaws in her approach each time she completed it successfully. The other recruits began to distance themselves from her, afraid that association with a woman their instructor clearly considered a liability would hurt their own chances of graduation. She ate meals alone, cleaned her equipment alone, and spent her few free hours alone in her bunk, studying field manuals and practicing breathing techniques while doubt crept in her thoughts like poison. There were nights when she lay awake wondering if everyone was right, if she was fooling herself into thinking she could succeed in a world that seemed designed to exclude her. The breaking point came during the third week of training, during a night navigation exercise in the dense forest surrounding the base. Each recruit was required to find and eliminate 3 targets using only map, compass, and night vision equipment, then return to base camp without being detected by instructor patrols. Elena had successfully located 2 of her 3 targets when she heard voices approaching through the underbrush. She had 2 choices: abandon her final target and return to camp with an incomplete mission, or risk detection by continuing forward. She chose to continue, crawling on her belly through thick brambles that tore at her uniform and scratched her face. The voices grew closer as she inched toward her final position, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it would give her away. Through her scope, she could see the silhouette of her target, a cardboard cutout positioned behind a fallen log approximately 300 meters away. It was a difficult shot in daylight, nearly impossible in darkness with instructors closing in on her position. Elena controlled her breathing, feeling her heartbeat slow as she entered the focused state she had learned to cultivate during hours of meditation and practice. The world narrowed to just her rifle, and the target. She squeezed the trigger with the gentle pressure she had practiced thousands of times, and the rifle fired with a soft crack that seemed impossibly loud in the stillness of the forest. The bullet found its mark, and she heard the satisfying ping of metal striking the target's hidden sensor. But before she could celebrate, flashlights blazed in her eyes, and she found herself surrounded by 3 instructors, including Sergeant Thompson. His face was barely visible in the darkness, but she could hear the disappointment in his voice as he spoke. He had been certain she would take the safe route back to camp, that she would choose the path of least resistance rather than risk everything for mission completion. Instead, she had demonstrated the kind of calculated risk-taking and commitment to the mission that separated true snipers from ordinary marksmen. The next morning, Thompson called her aside after the daily briefing. They walked in silence to a secluded part of the range where targets were set up at various distances, some as far as 800 meters away. He handed her a rifle she had never seen before, a custom-built weapon that felt perfectly balanced in her hands despite its considerable weight. Without explanation, he pointed to a target at the 600-meter mark, a distance she had never attempted during training. Elena settled into position, adjusting her body to accommodate the unfamiliar weapon. She studied the target through the scope, noting the way heat waves rising from the desert floor created distortions in her view. The wind was inconsistent, gusting from multiple directions as it bounced off the hills and valleys surrounding the range. It was not an ideal shot by any measure, but she sensed that this moment was important, that Thompson was testing more than just her marksmanship ability. She took 3 deep breaths, feeling her body relax with each exhalation. On the 4th breath, she held it halfway and squeezed the trigger with the same gentle pressure she had used in the forest. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and she kept her eye on the scope as the bullet traveled toward its target. Through the magnification, she saw the unmistakable puff of dust that indicated a direct hit to the center of the target. Thompson lowered his binoculars and looked at her with something approaching respect for the first time since training had begun. He didn't offer congratulations or praise, but his nod of acknowledgement spoke volumes. From that day forward, his criticism became constructive rather than destructive, focused on making her better rather than driving her out of the program. The other recruits began to take notice as well, slowly including her in their conversations and study groups as they realized she was not the weak link they had assumed her to be. But even as Elena began to earn acceptance from her peers and instructors, she knew that her real test would come not on the training grounds, but in the field where the targets shot back and the consequences of failure were measured not in graduation rates, but in lives lost. She had proven she could shoot straight and follow orders, but the question that haunted her quiet moments remained unanswered. When a moment came to take a human life in defense of others, would she have the strength to pull the trigger? The graduation ceremony was held on a crisp autumn morning, with families gathered to watch their sons and daughters receive the coveted sniper qualification badge. Elena's parents had driven all night from their small Texas town to be there, their faces beaming with pride despite their lingering concerns about the dangerous path their daughter had chosen. As she stood at attention while the badge was pinned to her uniform, Elena felt a surge of accomplishment unlike anything she had ever experienced. She had proven the doubters wrong, at least partially. She had demonstrated that she possessed the technical skills and mental discipline required to be a military sniper. But as she looked out at the faces of her family and fellow graduates, she knew that her real education was just beginning. The controlled environment of the training course bore little resemblance to the chaos and unpredictability of actual combat, where split-second decisions carried life-or-death consequences, and there were no instructors standing by to offer guidance. 3 weeks later, Elena received orders for her first deployment to a forward operating base in Afghanistan, where intelligence reports indicated increased insurgent activity along crucial supply routes. She would be assigned to Alpha Company, 2nd Battalion, a unit known for aggressive patrolling and high operational tempo. The company commander, Captain James Mitchell, had specifically requested a sniper team to support his operations, but his briefing materials made no mention of the fact that his new sniper was a woman barely out of training. As Elena packed her gear for deployment, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The doubt and criticism she had faced during training had forged her into something stronger than she had been before, but she understood that real strength could only be measured under fire. In a few days, she would find herself in a place where theoretical knowledge met brutal reality, where the difference between success and failure could be measured in the lives of the soldiers depending on her protection. The last night before deployment, she called her parents to say goodbye, knowing it might be months before she could speak with them again. Her mother cried, as she always did, while her father offered quiet words of support and pride. They didn't fully understand the path she had chosen, but they believed in her ability to succeed at whatever she set her mind to accomplishing. As Elena ended the call, she hoped their faith would prove justified when the time came to test it under the harsh sun and deadly circumstances of a combat zone, where survival depended on more than just good intentions and steady hands. The transport helicopter descended through thick desert dust toward Forward Operating Base Warrior, a collection of concrete barriers, sandbags, and makeshift structures carved out of the hostile Afghan landscape. Elena pressed her face to the small window, watching the barren mountains and scattered villages pass beneath them like pieces of an alien world. The reality of her situation hit her as she saw the scorched earth around a landing zone, evidence of recent mortar attacks that served as a violent welcome to her new home for the next 12 months. Captain James Mitchell waited on the landing pad as the helicopter touched down, his weathered face showing the strain of multiple deployments in some of the most dangerous regions of Afghanistan. At 34, he had already led men through countless engagements, earning their respect through a combination of tactical brilliance and genuine concern for their welfare. But as he watched the newest member of his unit emerge from the helicopter, his expression showed surprise that quickly shifted to skepticism. Elena shouldered her gear and walked toward him with confident steps, despite the uncertainty churning in her stomach. She had expected some resistance to her presence, but the captain's reaction was more pronounced than she had anticipated. His eyes swept over her small frame and youthful appearance, clearly questioning whether the army had made some kind of administrative error in assigning her to his unit. The other soldiers gathering around the landing zone made no effort to hide their curiosity, whispering among themselves as they tried to process the sight of a woman carrying sniper equipment. The briefing that followed was professional but tense. Captain Mitchell outlined the tactical situation his company faced, describing increased insurgent activity along the supply routes that connected their forward operating base to larger coalition forces. Enemy snipers had been particularly active, picking off soldiers during routine patrols and supply runs. The company had requested sniper support specifically to counter this threat, but Mitchell had clearly expected a more experienced operative than the young woman sitting across from him. Sergeant First Class David Park, who would serve as Elena's spotter, attended the briefing with barely concealed frustration. A veteran of 3 previous deployments, Park had worked with several sniper teams and had developed strong opinions about what made an effective partnership. He was a methodical soldier who believed in preparation, patience, and proven experience. The idea of trusting his life to someone fresh out of training school, regardless of their qualifications, violated every instinct he had developed during his time in combat zones. Elena's assigned quarters were a small room in a prefabricated building that housed the unit's senior enlisted personnel. The space was sparse, containing only a narrow cot, a metal locker, and a small desk fashioned from ammunition crates. She unpacked her personal belongings, arranging them with the same precision she applied to her equipment maintenance. The walls were thin enough that she could hear conversations from adjacent rooms, and she couldn't help but notice how often her name came up in discussions about the unit's new operational capabilities. The first weeks at the forward operating base served as an extended period of adjustment and evaluation. Elena spent her days zeroing her rifle on the base's makeshift range, studying aerial photographs of the surrounding terrain, and participating in patrol briefings where she tried to absorb every detail about enemy tactics and friendly positions. She maintained her equipment with religious devotion, cleaning and inspecting every component multiple times each day until the routine became as natural as breathing. But it was the social dynamics that proved most challenging to navigate. The soldiers of Alpha Company had developed tight bonds forged through shared danger and mutual dependence. They had inside jokes, shared references to previous missions, and an unspoken understanding of each other's capabilities and limitations. Elena found herself on the outside of these relationships, neither fully accepted as an equal nor entirely dismissed as incompetent. Sergeant Park maintained professional courtesy during their training exercises, but Elena could sense his reluctance to fully commit to their partnership. He questioned her range estimations, double-checked her calculations, and insisted on redundant communication procedures that suggested he didn't trust her ability to perform under pressure. During one particularly frustrating afternoon on the practice range, she finally confronted him about his obvious lack of confidence in her abilities. Park's response was direct and uncompromising. He explained that in his previous deployments, he had seen good soldiers die because of mistakes, miscommunications, and failures of nerve at critical moments. He had learned to trust slowly and verify constantly because the alternative was body bags and letters to families back home. Elena wasn't being singled out because she was a woman, he insisted, but because she was unproven in the kind of life-or-death situations they would inevitably face together. The conversation marked a turning point in their relationship, even though neither of them realized it at the time. Elena began to understand that Park's skepticism wasn't personal animosity, but professional caution born from hard experience. Park began to see that Elena's questions and attention to detail weren't signs of uncertainty, but evidence of a methodical approach to preparation that matched his own standards. Their first mission together came 3 weeks after Elena's arrival, when intelligence reports indicated that enemy snipers were operating from a cluster of abandoned buildings overlooking a major supply route. Captain Mitchell assigned Elena and Park to establish an overwatch position on a ridgeline approximately 800 meters from the suspected enemy location. Their orders were simple: observe, identify threats, and eliminate any hostile forces that presented a danger to coalition convoys. The insertion was conducted under cover of darkness, with Elena and Park moving on foot across rough terrain while the rest of their squad established security positions at predetermined checkpoints. Elena carried 40 pounds of equipment in addition to her rifle and ammunition, but she kept pace with Park's steady movement through the mountains without complaint. They reached their position just before dawn, settling into a carefully camouflaged hide site that provided excellent visibility over the target area. The first day of observation yielded no results. Elena spent hours behind her scope, methodically scanning every window, doorway, and potential firing position in the abandoned buildings below. Park maintained watch through his spotting scope, recording detailed notes about civilian movement patterns, vehicle traffic, and environmental conditions that might affect a shot. They communicated in whispers, sharing water and rations while never taking their eyes off their assigned sector for more than a few seconds at a time. The second day brought their first contact with the enemy. Elena was scanning the third floor of what appeared to be an old-school building when she caught a glimpse of movement in one of the windows. Through her scope, she could see a man in civilian clothing manipulating what appeared to be a rifle, though the angle and distance made positive identification difficult. She alerted Park, who confirmed the sighting through his own optic and began calculating range and wind conditions. The target presented himself more clearly as the morning progressed, moving between different windows as he established his own observation post overlooking the supply route. Elena could see that he carried a scoped rifle and was clearly conducting surveillance of coalition forces. When a supply convoy appeared on the route below, the man moved into a firing position, confirming his hostile intent. Elena felt her heart rate increase as she prepared for her first combat engagement. All the training scenarios in the world couldn't replicate the weight of knowing that she was about to take a human life, that her actions in the next few seconds would determine whether enemy bullets found their mark in unsuspecting coalition soldiers. She controlled her breathing, settled into her firing position, and waited for Park's final range and wind calculations. The shot, when it came, felt almost anticlimactic. Elena squeezed the trigger with the same gentle pressure she had practiced thousands of times on training ranges, and the rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed off the surrounding mountains. Through her scope, she saw the target drop from view, and Park confirmed that the threat had been eliminated. The supply convoy continued along its route, unaware that they had just been saved from potential ambush. But Elena felt no sense of celebration or accomplishment as she and Park maintained their position for several more hours, watching for additional threats that never materialized. The reality of combat was more sobering than she had expected, less dramatic than the movies and training scenarios had suggested. She had taken a life to protect other lives, and while she knew intellectually that her actions were justified and necessary, the emotional weight of that decision would stay with her long after they returned to base. The mission was considered a success by every objective measure. Enemy sniper activity along that particular route decreased significantly in the following weeks, and Captain Mitchell noted Elena's performance in his operational reports. But Elena herself struggled with conflicting emotions about her first kill, wondering if there had been alternatives she hadn't considered, if the target had family members who would mourn his death, if taking a life could ever truly be justified, even in the service of protecting others. Park seemed to sense her internal struggle without her having to articulate it. During their debriefing, he shared stories from his own first combat experiences, describing the complex emotions that came with taking life in warfare. He explained that questioning those actions was a sign of humanity rather than weakness, that soldiers who felt nothing after killing were often more dangerous to their own units than the enemy they faced. Over the following months, Elena and Park conducted dozens of similar missions, establishing themselves as one of the most effective sniper teams in the battalion. Elena's marksmanship proved consistently accurate at ranges up to and beyond 800 meters, while Park's experience and tactical knowledge helped them avoid detection and complete their mission safely. The skepticism that had initially greeted Elena's arrival gradually gave way to professional respect as her performance spoke louder than any doubts about her capabilities. But even as she earned acceptance from her unit and proved her worth in combat, Elena could sense that her greatest challenges still lay ahead. The enemy forces in their area of operations were becoming more sophisticated, their tactics more complex, their weapons more accurate. Intelligence reports suggested that experienced foreign fighters were infiltrating the region, bringing advanced training and equipment that would test every skill she had learned. As her first deployment entered its final months, Elena had evolved from an uncertain rookie into a confident and capable warrior. She had proven to herself and others that she belonged on the battlefield, that her small stature and gender were irrelevant when measured against her ability to complete the mission and protect her fellow soldiers. But the lessons she had learned about combat, leadership, and human nature would prove crucial when she faced the ultimate test of her skills and resolve in the deadly confrontation that lay ahead. The intelligence briefing came at 0400 hours on a Tuesday morning that started like any other, but would end in ways none of them could have imagined. Major Sarah Collins, the battalion intelligence officer, stood before a room of tired soldiers clutching coffee cups and trying to shake off the remnants of sleep. The map projected on the wall showed a remote valley system 25 kilometers from their forward operating base, an area that had been relatively quiet until recent satellite imagery revealed disturbing new activity. Elena sat in the second row, her notebook open and pen ready, despite having been awakened only 30 minutes earlier. Beside her, Sergeant Park yawned and stretched muscles still stiff from their previous day's mission. Around them, the other members of Bravo platoon displayed varying degrees of alertness, but all focused when Major Collins began describing what intelligence analysts had discovered in the remote valley system. The satellite photos were troubling. What had once been a collection of abandoned mud brick compounds now showed signs of extensive fortification and military activity. Vehicles moved along previously unused trails. New structures have been constructed in defensive positions, and thermal imaging revealed far more human activity than the valley's isolated location should have supported. Most concerning of all, communications intercepts suggested that a high-value target, possibly a regional Taliban commander, had established a headquarters in one of the compounds. Major Collins explained that the compound's location made traditional assault approaches extremely difficult. The valley was accessible by only 2 narrow passes, both of which could be easily defended by a small number of fighters. Air support was complicated by the high altitude and unpredictable mountain weather patterns. The surrounding terrain offered multiple escape routes that would allow enemy forces to disappear into the vast mountain wilderness if they received advance warning of an approaching assault. Captain Mitchell listened to the briefing with growing concern. His company had been selected to conduct the mission based on their experience in mountain operations and their success in previous engagements with entrenched enemy positions. But even with their proven capabilities, the tactical challenges presented by the target compound were unlike anything they had previously encountered. The enemy had chosen their location well, utilizing natural defensive advantages that would make any assault extremely costly in terms of casualties. The mission plan that emerged from subsequent planning sessions was complex and risky. Bravo platoon would approach the valley through the southern pass under cover of darkness, establish overwatch positions on the surrounding ridgelines, and coordinate a simultaneous assault on the compound from multiple directions. Elena and Park would be positioned on the highest accessible peak, approximately 2 miles from the target compound, where they could provide long-range support and eliminate any threats that emerged during the assault. But as the planning sessions continued over several days, it became clear that the mission faced significant challenges that couldn't be solved through conventional tactics. The compound's defensive positions were too well constructed to be suppressed by small arms fire alone, and the mountainous terrain prevented effective use of heavier weapon systems. Enemy fighters had prepared fallback positions throughout the valley, creating multiple layers of defense that would slow any assault and increase the likelihood of heavy casualties among the attacking forces. Elena studied the aerial photographs and topographical maps with increasing unease. The distance from her assigned position to the target compound was at the extreme edge of effective rifle range, even for the specialized long-range weapon system she had been training with during recent months. Environmental factors including altitude, temperature variations, and unpredictable mountain winds would make accurate shooting extremely difficult at such distances. But perhaps more troubling was the intelligence assessment that enemy forces in the compound included foreign fighters with advanced training and equipment. The foreign fighter presence changed the tactical equation significantly. Unlike local Taliban forces, who often lacked formal military training and modern equipment, these fighters brought professional skills and sophisticated weapons to the battlefield. Intelligence reports suggested they possessed sniper rifles capable of engaging targets at extended ranges, communications equipment that could coordinate defensive actions across multiple positions, and tactical knowledge that would allow them to exploit weaknesses in coalition assault plans. 3 days before the mission launch, Elena and Park conducted their final equipment checks and rehearsal exercises. Elena's rifle had been modified with enhanced optics and specialized ammunition designed for extreme range engagements. Park carried additional observation equipment, including a laser rangefinder and ballistic computer that would help calculate the complex firing solutions required for shots beyond normal engagement distances. Both soldiers had studied the terrain models and memorized contingency plans for various scenarios they might encounter during the mission. The night before departure, Elena found herself unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. She lay on her narrow cot, staring at the ceiling and mentally rehearsing the procedures she would follow during different phases of the mission. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her like a physical force. Dozens of soldiers would be depending on her ability to provide accurate supporting fire during the assault, and any failure on her part could result in casualties among men she had come to consider family. Captain Mitchell's final briefing emphasized the mission's importance beyond its immediate tactical objectives. The intelligence value of capturing or eliminating the high-value target could provide crucial information about enemy operations throughout the region. Success could disrupt insurgent activities along major supply routes and potentially save dozens of coalition lives in future engagements. But failure would not only result in friendly casualties, but could also provide the enemy with a propaganda victory that would encourage increased resistance activities. The helicopter insertion went smoothly despite challenging weather conditions and difficult terrain. Elena and Park, along with the 12 other members of Bravo Platoon, were inserted at 3 different locations around the valley perimeter, each team moving on foot to predetermined positions under cover of darkness. Elena's heart pounded as she and Park climbed through loose rock and sparse vegetation toward their assigned position on the valley's eastern rim, their route taking them through terrain so steep that they occasionally had to use climbing techniques to make progress. They reached their firing position 2 hours before dawn, settling into a carefully constructed hide site that provided excellent visibility over the entire valley while keeping them concealed from enemy observation. Through her scope, Elena could see the target compound clearly despite the 2-mile distance. The buildings were larger and more sophisticated than the aerial photographs had suggested, with defensive positions and fighting holes that indicated professional military planning rather than hasty improvisation. As dawn broke over the mountains, Elena began her systematic observation of the compound, noting the movement patterns of enemy personnel and identifying potential targets for engagement. Through her powerful scope, she could see fighters moving between buildings, manning defensive positions, and conducting what appeared to be equipment maintenance activities. The presence of heavy weapons, including mortars and machine guns, confirmed intelligence assessments about the compound's defensive capabilities. Park established communications with the other elements of Bravo Platoon, coordinating their observations and confirming that all teams were in position for the planned assault. The complexity of the communications plan reflected the challenging nature of the mission, with multiple frequencies and backup procedures designed to maintain coordination even if primary systems failed. Elena listened to the radio traffic while maintaining her visual surveillance, building a mental picture of friendly forces' positions and readiness status. The assault was scheduled to commence at 0800 hours, time to take advantage of morning light while avoiding the heat and visibility problems that would develop later in the day. But at 0745 hours, everything changed when Park received an urgent radio transmission from one of the other observation teams. Enemy forces had detected signs of the approaching assault and were rapidly reinforcing their positions while simultaneously beginning what appeared to be an evacuation of key personnel and equipment. Elena watched through her scope as the compound erupted into organized activity. Vehicles that had been hidden under camouflage netting were quickly prepared for departure, while fighters moved to reinforce positions around the compound's perimeter. Most critically, she could see what appeared to be high-value individuals being escorted toward vehicles that would carry them away from the compound before coalition forces could complete their assault. Captain Mitchell's voice crackled over the radio, his frustration evident as he weighed his limited options. The mission's success depended on preventing the escape of key personnel, but the premature discovery of coalition forces meant that a conventional assault would now face fully alerted and prepared defenders. The element of surprise had been lost, and with it much of the mission's chances for success without prohibitive casualties among the attacking forces. Elena studied the compound through her scope, noting the positions of enemy fighters and the routes being used by the escaping vehicles. The range was extreme, well beyond the distances she had engaged targets during previous missions, and environmental conditions, including gusting mountain winds, would make accurate shooting extremely difficult. But as she watched the evacuation proceeding, she realized that conventional assault tactics might no longer be sufficient to accomplish the mission objectives. The decision point arrived when Park confirmed that one of the vehicles preparing to depart contained what appeared to be the mission's primary target. The individual matched physical descriptions from intelligence files, and his obvious importance to the evacuation effort suggested that he was indeed the high-value target the mission had been designed to capture or eliminate. If he escaped from the compound, months of intelligence work and operational planning would be wasted, and coalition forces would have to begin their pursuit from scratch. Elena calculated the range to the compound's main gate, where the target vehicle was preparing to depart. The distance was approximately 5,280 meters, far beyond the effective range of standard sniper rifles, and at the extreme edge of what was possible even with her specialized equipment and ammunition. Environmental conditions, including altitude, temperature, and wind, would affect bullet trajectory in complex ways that would challenge even her most sophisticated ballistic calculations. But as she watched the target preparing to escape, Elena realized that this moment represented everything she had trained for, everything that had brought her to this remote mountainside in Afghanistan. The critics who had doubted her abilities, the instructors who had questioned her presence in sniper school, the fellow soldiers who had initially refused to accept her as an equal. All of their voices seemed to fade as she focused on the impossible shot that lay ahead. Elena's breathing slowed as she settled behind her rifle, the familiar weight of the weapon feeling both comforting and impossibly heavy in the thin mountain air. Through her scope, she could see the target vehicle positioned at the compound's main gate, its engine running as final preparations were made for departure. The distance readout on Park's laser rangefinder showed 5,284 meters, nearly 3 miles of open air between her position and the most important shot of her military career. Park worked frantically with his ballistic computer, inputting variables that would affect bullet trajectory over such an extreme distance. Air density at their elevation of 8,200 feet was significantly lower than at sea level, which would reduce air resistance but also affect the bullet stability in flight. Temperature readings showed a 20-degree difference between their position and the valley floor, creating thermal gradients that would bend the bullet's path in unpredictable ways. Most challenging of all, the mountain winds were gusting from multiple directions as air currents bounced off valley walls and ridgelines. The mathematics of the shot were staggering. Elena's bullet would take nearly 8 seconds to reach its target, during which time the Earth's rotation would actually shift the impact point by several inches. The bullet would drop more than 40 feet during its flight, requiring Elena to aim at a point in empty sky far above her intended target. Wind compensation alone required adjustments that pushed the limits of her rifle's mechanical capabilities, with crosswind corrections that seemed impossibly large for a precision shot. Captain Mitchell's voice came through their radio headsets, tension evident as he reported the tactical situation developing around the compound. The other elements of Bravo platoon were encountering heavier resistance than expected as they maneuvered into assault positions. Enemy mortars had begun targeting areas where coalition forces were suspected of operating, sending deadly fragmentation rounds arcing through the mountain air toward positions that had been carefully selected for concealment rather than protection from indirect fire. Elena could hear the distant thump of mortar rounds impacting around her fellow soldiers' positions, followed by urgent radio traffic as team leaders reported their status and requested medical evacuation for wounded personnel. The mission was rapidly devolving from a carefully planned operation into a desperate fight for survival, with coalition forces pinned down by accurate enemy fire, while their primary objective prepared to escape into the vast mountain wilderness. Park completed his ballistic calculations and relayed the firing solution to Elena, his voice steady despite the chaos developing around them. The elevation adjustment required was so extreme that Elena had to use her rifle's maximum available scope adjustment, then add additional compensation by adjusting her body position and aiming point. The windage correction was equally extreme, requiring her to aim at a point that appeared to be completely unrelated to her actual target. Through her scope, Elena could see individual enemy fighters moving between defensive positions, their faces visible despite the enormous distance separating them. The target vehicle's doors were open, and she could see figures moving around it with obvious urgency. Intelligence photographs had shown this individual from multiple angles, and she was confident that the man supervising the evacuation matched their high-value target. If he escaped, the mission would be considered a failure despite any tactical successes they might achieve in the subsequent assault. The wind conditions were constantly changing, requiring Elena to make continuous adjustments to her aiming point as she waited for the optimal moment to take her shot. Park called out wind speed and direction changes every few seconds, his voice providing a steady stream of information that helped Elena track the complex environmental factors affecting her bullet's potential flight path. But even with his expert assistance, the shot remained at the very edge of what was theoretically possible with their equipment and training. Elena's finger rested on her rifle's trigger as she focused on controlling every aspect of her body's physiology. Her heart rate had slowed to a steady rhythm that wouldn't interfere with the precise trigger control required for extreme-range shooting. Her breathing followed the pattern she had practiced thousands of times, with each exhalation bringing her deeper into the focused mental state that allowed her to shut out everything except the immediate requirements of the shot. The moment of decision arrived when Elena saw the target entering the vehicle that would carry him away from the compound and out of range of any weapon system the coalition forces possessed. Park's final wind reading showed a brief lull in the gusting conditions that had been complicating their calculations. Elena made microscopic adjustments to her aiming point, settled her breathing into the rhythm that had become second nature, and began the slow, steady trigger squeeze that would determine the mission's outcome. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed off the surrounding mountain peaks, sending its specialized bullet on an 8-second journey through the thin air above the Afghan valley. Elena maintained her position behind the scope, tracking the bullet's path through the magnified view, while Park started his stopwatch to time the bullet's flight. Around them, the sounds of battle continued as other elements of Bravo platoon engaged enemy forces. But for Elena and Park, the world had narrowed to the single point where their bullet would either find its target or miss by the tiny margins that separated success from failure at such extreme ranges. The bullet's flight seemed to last forever as it arced through the morning air, following a trajectory that carried it high above the valley floor before beginning its descent toward the compound. Elena could actually see the bullet's vapor trail through her scope, a faint distortion in the air that marked its passage toward the target. She held her breath, not from technique requirements, but from the sheer tension of watching years of training and preparation resolve into a single moment of truth. The impact, when it came, was both dramatic and anticlimactic. Through her scope, Elena saw the unmistakable evidence that her bullet had found its mark, but the extreme distance made details difficult to distinguish. Park confirmed the hit through his spotting scope, his voice showing excitement despite his usual professional composure. The target vehicle stopped moving, and Elena could see figures running toward it from other parts of the compound. But even as Elena and Park celebrated their success, the tactical situation around the compound continued to deteriorate. Enemy forces had fully mobilized their defenses, and coalition assault teams were taking casualties as they tried to advance through prepared killing zones. Captain Mitchell's voice over the radio showed increasing urgency as he coordinated medical evacuations and tried to maintain momentum for the assault despite the heavy resistance his forces were encountering. Elena realized that her successful shot had eliminated the mission's primary objective, but her fellow soldiers were still in deadly danger from the compound's remaining defenders. The enemy's defensive positions were too well prepared and too heavily armed to be overcome by small unit tactics alone. Air support was still unavailable due to weather conditions and the proximity of friendly forces to enemy positions. Park began identifying additional targets within Elena's effective range, focusing on enemy positions that posed the greatest threat to advancing coalition forces. Machine gun positions, mortar crews, and sniper positions all presented themselves through Elena's scope as potential targets that could be eliminated to support the ongoing assault. But each shot would require new calculations and adjustments to account for the changing conditions and different ranges involved. Elena's second shot targeted an enemy machine gun position that had been particularly effective in suppressing one of the advancing coalition teams. The range was shorter than her first shot, but still extreme by conventional standards, requiring careful calculation and precise execution. The bullet found its target, silencing the machine gun and allowing the pinned coalition team to advance toward the compound's outer perimeter. Over the next hour, Elena systematically engaged enemy positions throughout the compound, each shot carefully planned and executed to maximum effect. Her success rate at such extreme ranges defied conventional wisdom about sniper capabilities, but each successful engagement reduced the threat to advancing coalition forces and brought the mission closer to complete success. Park's expert spotting and ballistic calculations proved crucial to maintaining accuracy across multiple different ranges and target types. The compound fell to coalition forces 2 hours after Elena's first shot, with enemy resistance finally overcome by the combination of direct assault and precision supporting fire. The high-value targets elimination had disrupted enemy command and control, while Elena's systematic engagement of defensive positions had reduced their ability to coordinate effective resistance. Medical evacuation helicopters were able to reach wounded coalition personnel, and the mission was declared a complete success despite the initial setbacks and heavy resistance encountered. But Elena's extraordinary shooting performance had implications that extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. Word of the 3-mile shot spread rapidly through military communications networks, reaching senior commanders who understood the significance of what had been accomplished. The shot represented not just exceptional marksmanship, but a quantum leap in the effective range and capability of sniper systems, with implications for future military operations and tactical planning. As Elena and Park prepared to exfiltrate from their position, they could see coalition forces securing the compound below and beginning the detailed intelligence exploitation that would provide valuable information about enemy operations throughout the region. Their mission had succeeded beyond all expectations, but Elena understood that her performance would inevitably lead to increased attention and responsibility that she wasn't sure she was prepared to handle. The helicopter extraction flight back to their forward operating base gave Elena time to reflect on what had happened during the morning's engagement. She had accomplished something that military experts would have considered impossible, proving wrong every critic who had questioned her capabilities. But rather than feeling triumphant, she found herself thinking about the enormous responsibility that came with such exceptional abilities and wondering how her life would change as word of her achievement spread through military and intelligence communities. Park seemed to understand her conflicted feelings without needing explanation. As their helicopter flew over the mountain peaks toward base, he reminded her that exceptional capabilities brought exceptional opportunities to save lives and protect fellow soldiers. The shot she had made that morning had not only eliminated a high-value enemy target, but had probably saved the lives of multiple coalition personnel who would have been casualties in a more prolonged assault on the compound. The secure satellite phone call came 3 days after the mission, routing through multiple encrypted channels before reaching Captain Mitchell's field office at Forward Operating Base Warrior. On the other end of the line, General Patricia Hawkins, the theater commander responsible for coalition forces throughout Afghanistan, requested a detailed briefing about the extraordinary sniper engagement that had already generated classified reports at the highest levels of military command. Elena found herself in the unprecedented position of briefing a 3-star general about the technical aspects of her shot, explaining the environmental conditions, ballistic calculations, and tactical considerations that had made the engagement possible. General Hawkins listened intently, occasionally asking technical questions that demonstrated her own understanding of advanced marksmanship principles and the significance of what Elena had accomplished in the Afghan mountains. The general's questions focused not just on the immediate tactical success, but on the broader implications of Elena's capabilities for future military operations. The confirmed kill at 5,284 meters represented a new benchmark in sniper effectiveness, extending the theoretical engagement range for precision shooters into territory that had previously been considered impossible. Military strategists were already analyzing how such extended range capabilities might be integrated into future mission planning and tactical doctrine. But Elena's extraordinary performance had also attracted attention from sources beyond the military command structure. Intelligence agencies responsible for tracking and eliminating high-value targets worldwide were studying the engagement for lessons that might be applied to their own operations. Defense contractors were analyzing the equipment and ammunition specifications to understand how existing systems might be improved or new ones developed to replicate such performance. The media attention, while carefully controlled for security reasons, began almost immediately after preliminary reports reached the Pentagon. Military public affairs officers crafted carefully worded press releases that acknowledged the successful elimination of a high-value target without revealing operational details that might compromise future missions. But despite their efforts to maintain operational security, Elena's identity and the nature of her achievement began to emerge through unofficial channels. Elena struggled with the sudden attention and recognition that her performance had generated. Throughout her military career, she had focused on proving herself through professional competence rather than seeking publicity or recognition. The idea that her personal story might become public, subject to media scrutiny and public debate, made her deeply uncomfortable and conflicted about the implications for her future service. The reaction from her fellow soldiers was mixed, reflecting the complex dynamics that surrounded exceptional individual performance within military units. Some viewed Elena's achievement as a source of pride for their entire battalion, proof that their unit contained personnel capable of extraordinary accomplishments under the most challenging circumstances. Others worried that the attention would disrupt unit cohesion and create unrealistic expectations for future operations. Sergeant Park found himself in an equally unusual position as the spotter whose expertise had made Elena's shot possible. Military sniper doctrine emphasizes the team nature of precision shooting, with spotter and shooter sharing responsibility for mission success. Park's ballistic calculations and environmental assessments had been crucial to the engagement success, but media accounts inevitably focused on the shooter rather than the team effort that enabled such extraordinary performance. The technical analysis of Elena's shot, conducted by military ballistics experts at Aberdeen Proving Ground, revealed details that made her achievement even more remarkable. Computer modeling showed that the bullet had overcome environmental challenges that should have made accurate shooting impossible at such extreme ranges. The combination of Elena's shooting skills and Park's supporting expertise had achieved results that pushed the boundaries of what was theoretically possible with existing equipment and training methods. Military training establishments began studying the engagement for lessons that could be incorporated into advanced marksmanship programs. The shot demonstrated that exceptional performance was possible under extreme conditions, but it also highlighted the importance of extensive training, proper equipment, and expert tactical support. Sniper schools started developing new curricula that addressed extended-range shooting techniques and the specialized skills required for such demanding engagements. Elena's parents learned about their daughter's achievement through a carefully worded phone call from Captain Mitchell, who explained that Elena had performed exceptionally during a recent mission but couldn't provide specific details for security reasons. Miguel and Carmen Rodriguez understood that their daughter had done something important and dangerous, but the military's need for operational security meant they couldn't fully comprehend the magnitude of her accomplishment. The psychological impact of taking a life at such extreme range proved different from Elena's previous combat experiences. The extended time required for the bullet to reach its target had given her additional moments to contemplate the finality of her actions, while the magnification provided by her scope had made the humanity of her target uncomfortably clear. She found herself struggling with complex emotions about the intersection of duty, necessity, and the moral weight of taking human life. Military psychologists who specialized in combat stress and moral injury began studying Elena's case for insights into how exceptional combat performance might affect individual soldiers. The combination of high-stakes decision-making, extreme technical demands, and moral complexity created psychological pressures that were poorly understood within existing military medical frameworks. Elena's experiences would contribute to improved support systems for personnel who faced similar challenges. The classified after-action reports generated by Elena's mission became required reading for senior military planners responsible for special operations and counterterrorism activities. The engagement demonstrated new possibilities for precision targeting that could reduce collateral damage and improve mission success rates in complex operational environments. But it also highlighted the exceptional training and support requirements needed to achieve such results consistently. Elena's company completed their deployment 4 months after the 3-mile shot, returning to their home station at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, to heroes' welcome that felt both gratifying and overwhelming. The battalion's success rate during their Afghanistan deployment had been exceptional, with multiple high-value targets eliminated and significantly reduced enemy activity in their area of operations. Elena's contributions have played a crucial role in these achievements, but she remained uncomfortable with individual recognition for what she viewed as team accomplishments. The Army's personnel systems struggled to appropriately recognize and utilize Elena's exceptional capabilities within existing career development frameworks. Traditional sniper assignments and progression patterns weren't designed to accommodate someone whose abilities extended so far beyond conventional expectations. Senior leaders found themselves creating new positions and opportunities that could properly leverage her skills while providing appropriate professional development. Elena's story gradually became known within military communities worldwide, inspiring other female service members who face similar challenges and skepticism about their place in combat roles. Her achievement demonstrated that exceptional performance could overcome prejudice and preconceptions, but it also highlighted the additional pressures faced by women in male-dominated military specialties who had to prove themselves constantly rather than being accepted based on their qualifications. The tactical innovations that emerged from analysis of Elena's engagement began appearing in military training programs and operational planning throughout coalition forces. New equipment specifications, training methodologies, and tactical procedures incorporated lessons learned from the 3-mile shot, extending the capabilities of sniper teams across multiple services and allied nations. But perhaps the most significant impact of Elena's achievement was its effect on military culture and attitudes toward diversity in combat roles. Her performance provided concrete evidence that capability and effectiveness were not determined by gender or physical characteristics, but by training, preparation, and mental discipline. The shot that had once seemed impossible became a symbol of what could be accomplished when talent was recognized and properly developed regardless of conventional expectations. Elena continued her military service, advancing through increasingly responsible positions that utilized her unique skills and experience. She became an instructor at advanced sniper schools, sharing her expertise with new generations of precision shooters. Her techniques and methodologies became standard curriculum, ensuring that the lessons learned from her extraordinary achievement would benefit future military operations and the soldiers who conducted them. The 3-mile shot remained classified for several years after the engagement, but its impact on military doctrine and training was immediate and lasting. Elena Rodriguez had proven that the impossible was merely difficult when approached with proper preparation, exceptional skill, and unwavering determination. Her achievement became legend within military circles, inspiring countless others to push beyond conventional limits and redefine what was possible through dedication and expertise. Years later, when military historians analyzed the most significant sniper engagements of the Afghanistan conflict, Elena's 3-mile shot stood out not just for its technical achievement, but for its broader impact on military culture and capability. The young woman who had once been dismissed as too small and inexperienced had fundamentally changed how the military understood the potential of human performance when properly trained and supported. Elena's legacy extended far beyond the single shot that made her famous. She had demonstrated that excellence knew no gender, that determination could overcome prejudice, and that the most underestimated individuals sometimes possess the greatest potential for extraordinary achievement. The critics who had once predicted her failure were silenced by results that spoke louder than any words, proving that true strength came not from fitting conventional expectations, but from the courage to exceed them when it mattered most.